Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for this Whittier Trust webinar. I'm Pegine Grayson. I'm a Senior Vice President in our Philanthropic Services Office. I'm the Director of the office. I'm joined today by my colleague, Alex Repko, who's an officer and client advisor in our Philanthropic Services Office as well. Today, we'll be talking about balancing diligence and deference, philanthropic best practices for interfacing with grantees and applicants. But before we get started, I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be recording this webinar for the benefit of people who are not able to make it today. We'll be posting it on our website, and we'll circulate a link following the webinar today. We want to be sure and give you an opportunity to ask your questions, so we are reserving time at the end. In the meantime, at any point during the presentation, you can enter your questions into the Q&A box that's located in the top right corner of your screen. Alex, I can't.
You have an echo on here.
I have an echo. Are you hearing an echo? I don't know why. Alex, are you hearing an echo?
You sound fine to me. I don't hear any echo.
Okay. Well, I hope that that's just an aberration. I think I'm just going to keep on going. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We wanted to start by just sharing with you a little bit of our guiding principles. They are the ones that kind of set the backdrop for how we choose to interact with grantees. We wanted to share those with you. And then we'll launch into 4 buckets, if you will, different ways in which we can be interacting with grantees, and just wanted to share with you our best practices for those. So first, we'll talk a little bit about conducting grantee research and how you would initially reach out to or approach a potential grantee. Then we'll talk about performing financial diligence. Why do we do it? What are we looking for? What are the best ways to do it? Then site visits. Many of you have already been on site visits, but we'll share some of our thoughts on how to schedule them, how to conduct them, how to follow up on them afterwards. And finally, just ongoing communication with grantees. Okay, our philosophy. So at Whittier Trust, we've been doing this, managing our clients' foundations and donor advised funds for 65 plus years. So we have a lot of experience. I've been with Whittier for 12 years. But there are certain kinds of, adages, just philosophical approaches that guide everything we do with grantees. And I think I'll start with this one, which is we realize that we, and by we I mean you, the foundation representatives, and us, because we're representing you in this realm. But we can't do anything to accomplish our mission without the grantees, right? So we always try to approach grantees, nonprofit organizations, with gratitude. They're doing tough work out there, usually underfunded and understaffed, overworked, and we're grateful for what they're doing. And we try to treat them with respect. Secondly, we recognize that there is just an inherent power imbalance, right? Just by virtue of who the players are, think about it. The grantees, the nonprofit organizations, spend all their time scrambling for funding. They spend all year trying to bring in enough money to, balance their budgets, move their mission forward, carry out their programs. And we, on the other side, have the money. We're the decision makers. And by we, I mean you, but we're representing you. So just by virtue of where they sit and where we sit, there's this imbalance. And we want to work really hard to minimize that, because what we don't want to happen with our grantees, we don't want to set up a situation where they are afraid of us or they're afraid to speak candidly, right? What we hope that our grantees will do is share with us their challenges. Let us know if they ran into roadblocks or they had trouble, and let us know what they're doing to overcome them, or if they had a particular problem or a setback, what did they do to make sure it won't happen again? Is there any way that we can help them? And if we don't kind of go into it trying to minimize that power imbalance, chances are we're not going to get that kind of transparency. So we want to model that behavior and be as transparent with them as we can. Third, we try to right-size the diligence process. You may have heard this phrase before. It's definitely a trend in philanthropy. What we don't want our grantees to be doing is spending inordinate amounts of time in either the application process or the reporting process or anything that is costing them time and money and taking away from carrying out their programs, right? We really do want our grant dollars to go as far as they can towards mission accomplishment. So, we try to, make sure that what we're asking of the grantees is in relation to the size of the grant that we're contemplating. If it's a $5,000 director grant, then pretty much no diligence is a good idea. If it's a $250,000 multi-year grant, of course, we're going to want some reporting. We want to make sure that these dollars are being well spent and that we're monitoring the progress. We just want to make it proportional. And then finally, we want to be open to giving the kinds of grants that nonprofits really want the most. And I would say those fall generally into two categories: general operating support, keeping the lights on, paying the rent, paying salaries and benefits, paying for staff training. Those kinds of things are not sexy. They tend to be the kinds of things that, a lot of funders don't want to fund. They want to fund the program that has a direct benefit to those kids or those, senior citizens or whoever it is. But general operating is the lifeblood for nonprofits. And so we try to be open to that idea. And secondly, multi-year funding, right? Just like in the for-profit world, nonprofits need to be able to budget. They need to plan for the future. And it's really tough if year to year they don't know where their next, grant or donation is coming from. So to the extent that we can, it's always kind of manna from heaven for these organizations to get a 3-year grant, let's say. That helps them say, well, then I think with 3 years of stable funding, we can take a risk and hire this new program director and launch this new program, whereas they might not want to take that risk if all they had was 1 year of funding. So, next slide. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Pegine. Next slide. So on that note, we're focusing a bit more on you now and figuring out how do you even start the philanthropic giving process. I think some of you have experience with this, most of you do. But for a first step, it's really determining your philanthropic focus. This is very high level. You might already have a few ideas in your mind. You might already have some interests. You've maybe always been interested in giving to causes that support climate change. So that's an interest area. But some questions you might ask yourself is just, why are you giving? What do you want to achieve? And what do you maybe want to change or preserve in the world? So that's the first step. You can look at this map on the right, the red diagram. And this is just a few different interest areas that we listed out: environment, health and safety, education, arts and culture, human civil rights. And these can all be really even divided even further. Education, that's quite a broad topic. So maybe you're interested in only giving to elementary schools or higher education research programs. But this really helps both yourself, and it helps you kind of figure out where am I actually interested in supporting. And if you are working with a Whittier Trust advisor, also helps us kind of gauge a good idea of maybe what type of causes are you interested in supporting, and then we can help you with the research process thereafter. And then one further way to narrow down your focus is determining a geographic focus. And so as you can see in the blue diagram, you might be interested in just supporting your local community. Maybe you have some organizations just right close to your neighborhood that you really want to support, or maybe just within your state or within the US or whatever, the continent you're located on. Or maybe you're interested in focusing on the globe and focusing on international organizations. We are definitely able to help you process those. And so once you have your philanthropic interests defined, the research process begins. And there's multiple different ways that you can complete the research process. As we always want to recommend, you are more than happy to use us as tools. We are here, and that's what we're here for. And so if you had a few ideas, or maybe your siblings or cousins had a few ideas of organizations they've heard of, feel free to reach out to one of us, and we can help with the research process. Otherwise, you can just do a simple Google search. Google, really cannot go wrong with that, and that can help you find the organization's website, which we'll delve into a little bit later down the slide. You also, GuideStar is a really handy resource. We use it almost every day, and that's where you can create a free account, or we have an account that we can help download reports for you. This is really just a really vast database that has information about each charity, their tax ID, their tax status, and we can download these really succinct reports that detail their programs and any information you would like. There's also Charity Navigator, which is similar. And as I touched on, again, looking at an organization's website, really, there's a few key indicators that are really good to look for in a website. You can kind of immediately tell when you look at a website of, is the charity, is the information up to date? How regularly are they posting? Does it seem like they have a staff there with contact information? If you wanted to reach out to someone, is it pretty clear? And so we advise, just as a first step, just look at their website. And again, it can just be the responsiveness of a grantee can really, if you know that they are going to be very responsive, it can really smooth out the grant making process on both ends. You can also help use the website to find the development director. And so if you have a charity in mind and you don't know anyone there and you're not sure who to reach out to, we advise reaching out to anyone in their development team. Development director is great, but maybe if you try to call them and they're busy, try if they have an assistant, you can try them, and they should be able to answer any questions you have and just kind of get the conversation started. And then again, we'll touch on this later, but you could also consider going on a site visit. And that really, as many of you know, really changes the game and helps you see the charity on the ground doing their work, and can give you a clear understanding of, is this something I want to support, or is this something I prefer not to? Off to you, Pegine.
Great. I'm just going to jump in and piggyback off something that you said, Alex, which is, when you reach out to somebody on the website, they'll usually jump right in and respond. We're actually periodically, I won't say often, but periodically shocked, excuse me, at how sometimes organizations just don't respond. And if they really don't, after, we will try them 2 or 3 times and say, I'm representing a foundation or a family that's interested in learning more because of a potential grant, and we don't hear anything. I think that is a red flag. We know they're overworked and understaffed and all of that, but if they can't respond to someone who is potentially going to make a grant to them, we tend to just move on because there's a certain level of dysfunction, which might be indicative of, a lack of effectiveness. But in any case, let's say that you've found the development director's email. What do you say? How do you represent yourself? I think it's pretty simple. You just, again, we're being honest and transparent, and we're saying, hi, I'm, John Smith. I am a member of the junior board, the board of directors of the XYZ Foundation, and I'm interested in learning more. I've been on your website, it looks great, but we're thinking of a possible grant and wondering, if you can answer a few questions, or, let me come in and see, or have a meeting, or whatever it is that you're hoping for. So what kinds of information at this point do you want to request? Again, with a view towards right-sizing the diligence process, if what you're thinking about doing is, directing a $5,000 discretionary grant, then you're not going to want to request a formal proposal and all of their financials and all of that. This is much more kind of information gathering, right? And you're keeping the the lift on their part lighter. But if you're looking into this organization as a representative of the board and they're contemplating making a major grant, then probably a good starting place is to ask them to submit a letter of inquiry. They're called LOIs in short, and most development directors will know exactly what that means. But what we typically say is we'd love to have just a 2 to 3 page letter from you that gives a little bit about your mission and history, an overview of your programs, and what are your most compelling needs. You know, how, and when I request those letters, I like to give them a range and say, look, you know, this amount could change, but right now what we're contemplating is a possible grant of between X and Y. You know, it could be between $25,000 and $50,000, or it could be between 5 and 10. Hopefully between 5 and 10, you're not asking for an LOI. But whatever the amount is, that really helps them, because without that information, they really won't even know what to ask or what program to put forth to you, because there's a big difference between what they can do with 20,000, what they can do with 150, right? So at this early stage, when we're just asking for a letter of inquiry, we're really not asking for financials. Why? Because this is the moment in time where they're going to help you to figure out if you're really interested. And it can be you, if it's your discretionary grant that you're working on, or it could be the board, right? The LOI comes in, it doesn't take them all that much time to put together a 2 to 3 page letter. It comes in, we help you get it before the board in the next board meeting book. And then the board gets to say, yeah, this sounds great. We should know more. Let's move it forward on the docket. And at that point is when you would probably say, all right, we're interested in a full proposal and we'd like to see your financials. We don't always ask for financials, but we do typically if it's a brand new organization to us, we don't know anything about them, or if it's a really big grant that we're contemplating. Next slide. So, financial diligence. What are we looking for? First of all, why do we do that? Why would we want to look at finances for a nonprofit? Well, first of all, we want to make sure that they're in good standing with the IRS, right? That they are complying with their legal obligations. So if they don't have a current 990, or if they're large enough audited financial statements, then right there is a red flag, and we're probably not going to want to fund them. But assuming they do, they filed a 990, why do we want to look at that? We're trying to figure out if they're relatively financially stable, not perfect. And I say that because it's important to know that, you know, the finances, the revenues of nonprofits are fluctuating. They just always will. You know, they do their best to budget. There's an expectation of when funds are likely to come in, how much they'll probably raise at their gala. This grant will hopefully come in October, but all kinds of things happen, right? Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes money gets delayed. It comes in the next year. So we're not concerned with deficits per se. What we are concerned with, though, is a huge deficit. If they're a $1.5 million organization and their deficit last year was $500,000, that's a third of their budget. So that's a potential concern. On the other hand, if they're a $16 million budget and they had a $45,000 deficit, you almost don't care about that at all. That's almost a rounding error for a $16 million budget. And you're also looking at trends. So let's say you see, you know, a modest deficit this year. You might want to look at the prior 2 years and see what the trend was. Was it significantly more 3 years ago and they've been chipping away at it, which shows you they've got a plan? They're putting something in place to make that deficit smaller? Or conversely, is it getting bigger and maybe something to worry about? We have on this slide, you know, the specific parts of the 990 where you could find certain information. I'm not going to walk you through that. But I will say, you know, so what do you do? Let's say you've looked at them and you have a concern. What we don't do is kind of call up their CFO or their development director and be accusatory in any way. like, wait a minute, what happened here? You know, it's more the way that we approach it is, so I've noticed on your 990 that you've been showing deficits for the past couple of years, and they're not insignificant. So help me to understand what that's about. What's the source of those? And is there a plan? We're wondering if there's a plan in place for turning that around, because I know, and I'm just telling you what I would say to the grantee, I know that my board is going to be potentially concerned, and I'd love to have your response ready so that I have an explanation to share with them. And when you put it that way, they're usually more than happy. They're glad you asked. They want the opportunity to clear up anything that might, jettison their request. So they're likely to just give you an explanation. And most of the time it makes sense. And it can be, our board knew that. We did that on purpose because we're launching a new program, and the board said, you know what, it's worth pulling money from our endowment to do that and showing a deficit, but this is an investment in our programs. So there's all kinds of possible explanations. The other thing I just want to touch on is CEO salary. Everybody's probably heard a lot about that. Sometimes it's in the press. There certainly is a threshold above which it can be excessive. But I guess I just want to share my personal philosophy is there's no hard and fast rule about it. I try to keep in mind that CEOs and executive directors of nonprofits have an incredibly tough job, especially, just like the CEOs of for-profit companies. It's no easier to run a nonprofit. In fact, it can be harder because you don't have, lots of revenue coming in from your products, right? So they're working very hard. They're managing staff. They're bringing in money. I think they deserve to be compensated for it. So you just kind of want to look at what they're earning, and you'll find that on page 7 of the 990, and just kind of compare it to the overall budget and ask, does it make sense? But what we certainly don't want to convey to nonprofits is you don't deserve to have a high quality CEO. You should have someone who's kind of middling because we want you to save that money, right? We want our grantees to be really well run and have an inspirational visionary leader at the top who feels well valued, because that's how they're going to be around for a long time and be effective in their mission. The last thing I'll say is project budget. We don't always ask for that. Sometimes you might want to see it. What does this look like, and what's the funding plan for it? Are we going to be the only funder funding this whole project? You probably don't want that, at least over the long term. If you are at the outset, let's say this is a project that you want to see them do, you want it to get off the ground and you want to help, it might make sense to give them, a larger amount the first year, and then let them know that it's going to taper down over the next couple of years, because you're hoping that that'll buy them time to diversify their revenue sources and become less dependent on your funding over time. I think I'll stop there. Back to you.
I want to chime in actually and just say, on Pegine's point, never be afraid to ask the grantee questions. I think we had a recent board meeting where some of the board members had a few questions about the budget surplus for different grantees, and we just sent an email to the grantees because we had tried to develop the best relationship we could, and they got back to us really quickly with a little explanation, and then we were able to help them out by presenting that at the board meeting. So just, I guess, to emphasize, developing that relationship with the grantees really helps, because then if you do have a last minute question where you're not sure about what part of their 990, they're open to sharing and answering. And they're thankful for the opportunity too.
Alex, you mentioned a good point, and I should have said this. You could also potentially be concerned about surplus, right? I've had clients who will look at a 990 and say, well, wait a minute, if they're showing surpluses 3 years in a row, maybe they don't really need our funding. And instead of jumping to conclusions, sorry about that, it's better to just ask the question, because maybe they're saying, you know what, we have been so ravaged by, COVID or whatever economic conditions there have been, we're determined to build up an endowment, and that's what we've been working towards. So all of those surpluses are going towards an endowment to make us more sustainable. So you never know what they might say, but it's worth asking.
Great. Well, so now we move into the site visit section. And so again, I'm sure many of you have participated in these, and post-COVID, we're probably excited about the opportunity to have in-person site visits again. So many might not know that most grantees are very welcome to having visitors, and they want you there. So even though it might seem intimidating at first to ask a grantee out of the blue, can we visit your site? They will most likely be very open to it. So I guess as the first step is just scheduling the visits, and really the main step you need to do is just reach out to your point of contact. Either you knew, or again, you found a contact through their website, and just email them and ask, would you be open for a site visit? But just one point to note, even though they will most likely be very willing to have you, you do want to be respectful of their time, because a lot of times they have a lot of other things going on as well. And also, you just want to keep in mind that if it is a grant on the smaller size, you might not want to have a full-fledged all-day site visit with lunch and breakfast and all of that stuff, just because obviously it does cost money, and sometimes maybe the foundation you're with will support that, but sometimes, a lot of times, the grantee will pay for that. So you just want to be mindful of your request, and even if it is a smaller grant, maybe just keep it to just under an hour site visit. But they will be willing to have you, and it really does make a difference. And then in terms of conducting the site visit, obviously you want to show up on time. And it is important for the on-time part, because a lot of times they might have some of their board members there, or they might have quite a few of their staff members there waiting for you. And so they've all taken time out of their day. That you just want to be respectful of that. And then just to look for success indicators. How organized and clean are they? Do they seem energetic? Do they seem prepared? They don't have to have some huge presentation, but when they do have if they do have one, you can just kind of tell, okay, this organization really took time out of their day to present this presentation for us and put their best foot forward. That you'll just kind of subtly realize, like, okay, if they're doing this for us, that's maybe the type of organization I would want to support. They seem really organized and responsible. And yeah, just be appreciative and respectful, ask any questions. And then just a final note is just to offer information about yourself. Don't be afraid, even if you're unsure of if you are going to be giving to them. It really helps the transparency aspect, just to be as open and honest as you can. And they'll probably want to hear about your backgrounds. I'm sure they may have even researched you. They probably know what foundation you're coming from. But just to be open and honest about how long you've participated on the foundation, your grant-making interests, and even just the decision-making process. You could say, maybe just give an overview of how does the foundation accept LOIs? When do they conduct their grant-making? That's okay information to share, and it will help them, because if you don't say any of that information, they might just be kept in the dark a little bit, and they might just not know at all the whole entire year of when is the grant-making process happening. So don't be afraid to share information about you and the foundation. And then the next part is after the visit. And so you hopefully had a great time. And so we just suggest just sending a thank you email to all the participants. Chances are they already had emailed you over email to organize the logistics. So you can just have a quick email back to them saying thank you, even if you're not intending to support them, just because I think, again, it really just helps. Maybe this year you're not interested in supporting them, but maybe you know that they're programmed to be of interest to someone else in your family, that you could recommend them. That it's good, again, to just build that strong relationship with the grantees, so that if you are interested in the future, you go back to them and you already have that connection. And again, just letting them know about the timing of any grant decisions and what the likely next steps are. Often, if you're working with Whittier Trust advisors, you can just say that one of us will reach out to them with the next steps. But yeah, it really, again, helps just to be as transparent as you can. And as you can see, there's a few pictures here from some site visits that happened. I think this is at the San Diego Zoo. So yeah, lots of great memories. There were a few more pictures. And so you can tell just from these past couple of years, it's been some great visits, and it really does leave a long-lasting impact on you and family. Great. Off to Pegine.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end. I want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, please go ahead and plug them into the Q&A box. Alex will start to sift through those now. So, the question is, now you've done it, right? You've reached out to them, you've engaged in some diligence, maybe you've done a site visit. So what does that look like? There are lots of different options. Sometimes we just make a grant and then we kind of move on. But there's so much more that's possible. And I just want to make sure you kind of at least are asking yourself the question, might I want to stay more involved? You can ask to be added to their regular newsletter so that you're up to speed on what's happening. You can ask them to, give you an update at the end of the year, the end of the grant term. Just let me know in an informal email or a short letter, what you did with those grant funds. We'd love to know. And beyond that, of course, there's always volunteering. There's, looking around and saying, wow, this is something I really might want to be a part of. And maybe they could benefit from more than just our foundation's money. But that's a very rewarding way, I think, to stay involved in an organization and, frankly, continue to evaluate their effectiveness. If you're a volunteer, you're going to see it. Some of our clients opt for remaining anonymous, and that's fine too. We can do that better through a donor-advised fund. It's a little more challenging to remain anonymous for a foundation. But I think most of the time, most of our clients are wanting to develop genuine relationships with their grantees, and it is a lot of fun. And I guess I'll end there just with one final reminder that we are here to help you. Alex and I love this work. It's a privilege to work with our philanthropic families and help the next generation kind of get up to speed and find their philanthropic legs. So call on us anytime. And now let's have a couple questions, Alex. What are you seeing?
Yes, we have two. So thank you for submitting those. The first one is, do you have recommendations around maximizing impact with the idea that government or corporate giving far outpace all private funding?
The government or corporate, say that again?
Government or corporate giving far outpace all private funding. This may be how organizations are positioning themselves for financial stability and impact through these sources.
So I'll jump in, but Alex, jump in if you want. But I think the first thing I want to just emphasize is, yes, anything that the private philanthropic sector can do is going to be dwarfed by government money, generally speaking. There are areas, of course, where the government isn't acting, but generally speaking, we can't even begin to reach what government does. Having said that, government is also incredibly lumbering, slow, not innovative. It takes a long time to get from the application stage to final approval, and then talk about hoops. I mean, organizations typically have to hire a dedicated person just to manage government grants because they are so oppressive in what they require. So all of those things being true, nonprofits really love private philanthropy because we can be so much more nimble, so much more creative. We're the ones who, generally speaking, are not afraid to support a startup or take a little bit more risk, right? Government feels like it can't take any risk at all because it's taxpayer money. But with charitable dollars, you can. And so there's a place for private philanthropy that I think is very exciting. And I think it has a lot of potential for identifying the promising pilots, taking an innovative idea and saying, wow, this worked. And but for the private philanthropy funding it, we never would have even known that because government wouldn't get behind it until it's already a going concern, right? So I don't know. Would you add anything, Alex? Do you want to say something?
No, I mean, I know off that question, there's one more question, just is how can philanthropy be used as venture capital-ish finances to offer ideas of change to be proven? I think I might be reading that wrong. No, I would agree with you, Pegine. I think it really depends also. I think some foundations, they might not want to support grantees that get any government support. I think it is tough because during COVID, obviously, I think a lot of grantees, maybe they had no other choice. So I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think it's a red flag initially. But it is, again, it is pretty amazing that the difference you have from private funding from different foundations, I think that's where we have really tried to, even with reporting requirements, we try to be more lenient on those unless it's really required, because we know that they already have so many other government loans they might be applying for that have all these necessary requirements that is taking up their time, that the benefits of private philanthropy can go much further. Maybe we can get back to the next question afterwards.
Yeah, I like this next question because, we've been talking today about making traditional grants to nonprofit organizations, and that is a big piece of what foundations do, obviously. But that's not all of what foundations can do. And there are actually some very exciting ways that foundations can begin to align the other 95% of their corpus with their values and helping to move the foundation's mission forward outside of the grant-making process. So we call that impact investing or social venture investing or ESG, which stands for environmental social governance. Screens. You can do all kinds of things, but I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface there. You can have, for example, if your mission is to further, access to healthcare for low-income folks in your community, you can start to look into what's being done in the healthcare realm that is cutting edge, innovative, just needs a boost to get it to take this concept to market. It's a for-profit company, but they're never going to realize what they're doing without some help to prove the concept. And foundations can actually make grants to or make investments in, both of those things are true, the private sector, as long as the goal, the project that you're supporting is for the public benefit. There's certain rules around that. But the thing to remember as you start to think, I wonder if we could diversify our investments and go a little in that direction. 15 years ago, you had to really sacrifice returns to do something like that. The board would have to say, yeah, I know, we're probably only going to get 2 or 3% and the market might give us 8, but this is worth it and we're going to do it anyway. It's a fair choice. But these days, impact investing has come so far that you do not have to sacrifice returns. There are ways that you can do that. Align your mission with your investments and still realize good returns. So anyway, I'm glad you asked that question.
No, that's a great point. Sorry I misread that earlier, but it is true. I feel like even since I've started, we've seen the increase there's a foundation this year who they're going forward with a MRI, mission-related investment. And it is really exciting because it's not part of the 5% grant making budget. It's an investment, but it's another way to give back to the community. And it is, it's exciting. And I can expect that those trends are only going to continue to increase over time. So the next question we have is, what do you find the average time frame is to go from initial inquiry to post-site visit and being able to make the grant recommendation?
Well, I would say on that one that has everything to do with the grant making cycle of your foundation. If it's a discretionary grant, then you alone have been given the authority to direct this grant and you can make it as quickly as you want. But short of that, if it's a board, kind of communal grant, it depends. Does your foundation meet once a year and do all its grant making in May? Do they meet quarterly? And, it's just a matter of getting it on the next docket. Is there a two-stage process? I described LOIs, and then they move forward with a full proposal, and then there's a decision. But lately, a lot of my clients have been deciding, what? We don't want to do that two-stage thing. We don't want to make our clients, our grantees, jump through that second set of hoops. We're just going to award our grants based on the letters of inquiry. And we'll do extra diligence if we feel like we need to. So it's just a matter of what your foundation has put in place as its grant-making process.
Yeah. And I would agree. Earlier this year, there was a board meeting where we had site visits the day before the board meeting where all the grant making happened. So it was just about 3 grantees we visited. They had not been approved. None of the funding had been approved yet. And the next day we had the whole meeting where we were able to go down, decide their grant making. And so the grantees were obviously probably thankful because they could really put on a good show while we were there, and they knew the grant making was happening the next day. But it really just depends on the foundation. But yeah, Pegine is right. If it has to do with your personal discretionary allocations, then that's much more fluid and flexible. It kind of depends on what you would prefer.
And about site visits, there's lots of different reasons to conduct site visits. It's not always that you're still vetting them for a grant. That is a good way, and I think a lot of our clients do that. That's the example Alex gave. Let's see them, and then we'll make the decision the next day. But sometimes foundation boards want to just visit them. They're in the middle of a multi-year grant, and we just want to see what's happening. Or they were a prior grantee, and now they're coming back, and they're wanting to get back on the list. Or, the foundation is just wanting to go in a different direction, grant making wise, and they're wanting to just learn. And often grantees are really willing to do that, to just say, okay, we'll tell you about what we do and how we do it. Even though they know that there's no pending request, they're just kind of banking on the fact that maybe you'll fall in love with them and a grant will come down the line. So lots of different reasons why you might want to visit one.
So then in terms of, I know it's, but there's one more we could do is what happens if you don't know how much to give? And what if you're not sure, if you haven't decided on the exact amount you are going to give to the grantee, and the grantee asks, what range should we put in our LOI? Do you have any recommendations on that? You can chime in unless you would like to.
Sure, I'll take a stab. That's never an exact science, I don't think, because no one representative of a foundation board has that decision-making authority, right? You never really know what's going to happen at the board meeting, and even if what was tossed around was the idea of maybe a $50,000 grant, I've seen it go both ways. Right? It can be, at the end of the day, they can say, you know what, we had too many great requests. We're going to cut everybody back. We're only going to give them 25. Or, wow, we actually declined 3 of these, which means we have more to give. Maybe we'll just double that. I've seen it go both ways. So I like to give them a range sometimes, or I'll say, kind of split it in the middle. Tell us what you would do with 75,000. Knowing that it might be between 50 and 100. And I say, the board will reserve the right to move it up or down depending on how the docket plays out, but that'll just give them an idea of what to ask for. And you base that on, what does the foundation typically do? Like you can see from past grants lists, this foundation has pretty much never made a grant for more than 100,000. So you're not going to say, come in at 150. Or on average, they're really making a lot of grants at $25,000. You just kind of get used to the size that you see, and that'll help you gauge, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was going to just add as well, it is good just to be, it never harms, again, to be transparent of if you give them a range, you can also just say it might change during the board meeting. I think some grantees I think I've had experiences before where they call kind of afraid, asking, what amount should we put? And I always try to calm their fears and just say, don't worry, like, here's a rough estimate, but it's not cement. It doesn't like it has to be. If they ask for an amount that is outside of the range of what the foundation typically gives, that can change. And again, we can always give recommendations to them and say, this isn't quite the correct asking amount. So yeah, just transparency is key. Otherwise, we have no other questions unless anyone has any last burning questions on their minds. But
looks like we might let you go a little bit early. Well, we hope this was helpful. You know where to find us if anything occurs to you now or in the future. We're here to help. And again, we will be circulating the link so that you can share it with others if you want. It'll be posted on our website. So as more and more, next gen folks become involved in their family's philanthropy, we can roll this out again. So thank you so much for taking time with us today.
Thank you.